Order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. James, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Lenny Nelson.
Here.
Patty Crowan. Miles Schlesinger.
Yes.
Marie McFarland.
Here.
Joshua Brainerd. Marcy Baker.
Here.
Steve Griffiths.
Here. Thank you. Are there any agenda changes or revisions?
No, Chair.
Right. We received the minutes for our meeting on September 17th. Thank you, James, for doing a really good job with them. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, good. Next on the agenda is final orders for 2019-07. Richard, before we take a vote on that, could you remind us what a final order is? That would help our two new planning commissioners.
Typically, a final order is for a quasi-judicial decision where you've made a final decision and the appeal goes only from either here to the circuit court or here to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Circuit court would be applicable to the Vacation Rental License Appeals Board, not because everything else is land use, it goes to LUPA. The only other kind of order you do is a recommendation to the City Council, and then your final recommendations go on to the council, but the council makes the final decision.
Thank you. All right. Do we have a motion to approve the final recommendation for 2019-07?
I move that we accept CPA CZ 2019-03.
Wait a minute.
Oh, isn't that?
We got
Oh, no,
two,
wrong
three,
one.
and
I'm
seven.
sorry. 2019-07. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That's approved. And we're now at a public hearing and deliberation, and it is now 6:04 p.m. The public hearing for file Z0A 2019-09 is now open. This public hearing concerns a city-initiated proposal to amend Title 17 zoning of the Lincoln City Municipal Code. The proposal amends Section 17.72.060, Special Conditions, Standards, and Limitations by Zoning District, paragraph C.2 to affirm, extend, and reinstate the allowance for feather banners for an additional 6 months. The Planning Commission's role in the legislative process is to consider any written or oral comments or testimony, as well as information from staff, and present a recommendation to the City Council, who will hold an additional public hearing. The City Council may adopt the Planning Commission recommendation or may take other action. The Commission must take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the Commission wish to declare a conflict of interest in this matter? Seeing none. The substantive criteria that apply to this hearing include the statewide planning goals, the city's comprehensive plan, and the applicable provisions of the city's zoning ordinance. Comments and testimony should be directed to these criteria or to other criteria that you believe apply to the subject of this hearing. I have a question for the attorney. Do I need to go through the rest of this since we don't seem to have anybody who will be testifying this evening?
Yeah, this is a legislative matter, but you're just talking about the regular order of proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anyone hiding under the seats that would like an explanation as to the regular order of proceedings, be happy to give it to you. Otherwise, let's just conduct the hearing.
No, just conduct it, keep going.
Just
Keep going?
let's just
Okay.
go.
So, before the staff presents a report, I'll summarize the adopted public hearing procedures. The staff will present a report and respond to any questions. After that, any person may speak up for 3 minutes. If your testimony includes questions, please direct them to me as the chair. We won't interrupt your testimony to answer questions. We may direct your questions to staff following your testimony. If the Planning Commission has questions, your time responding to any questions will not be counted in your time limit. If you wish to speak, please write your name and mailing address clearly on the sign-up list at the entrance. Please speak directly into the microphone and begin by stating your name only. If you also have written testimony to submit into the record, please provide a copy to the recorder. Will the staff please present its report?
I'm going to take this. Essentially, the city council was made aware of the fact that the sunset provision for feather banners being substituted for flags was expiring on October 8th. And so at their first meeting in September, they directed staff to extend that allowance to have feather banners for an additional 6 months. Unfortunately, ordinances take time, and amendment to Title 17 requires process, including notice to DLCD and findings, and has to come to you. So the code contains this provision about feather banners in 2 sections. Municipal Code, Chapter 934, which is under the police public welfare kind of regulations, and also in the land use code. Now, we've been trying to move temporary signs out of the land use code because they don't require building permits, and they're really just temporary regulations, and they don't need to be in the land development code. It's not really land development, it's just think of a political sign people put in their yard. That's something we can regulate without getting into land use process. So we've been moving those things out, but right now they're in both places, Chapter 934 and Title 17. The council has already amended Chapter 934 to extend the allowance for the feather banners by 6 months so that staff can finish their work on the sign code. Now, we're going to have a work session with the City Council and the Planning Commission in about a week, the 7th, I guess. So the council had directed that this get done. 934 has already been amended. Notice was given to DLCD that we were doing this, and we've created this ordinance for your review. But essentially, it's just doing what the council said. Let's keep the allowance for feather banners for 6 more months while we continue the work on the sign ordinance. Probably don't need 6 months, but at least for purposes of getting things done, we gave ourselves 6 months. So that's all we really have here, and I went through and did the findings today for the city council. And when you look at what this is, the only goal that seems to be implicated at all might be the aesthetic goal, and everything else, the goal, the statewide planning goals and our comprehensive plan goals really don't apply. And in terms of aesthetics, it's like art. Some people, that's art. Some people, it's not art. And all we're really doing is studying whether or not we want to do this. So I don't think there's any adverse impact in terms of the statewide planning goals, and I wrote that. And I'm telling you, I don't think there is, but maybe you have a feeling that it is. In terms of the economic goals, I know businesses are very much in favor of having more wavy signage that gets people's attention. And so I mentioned that, but I don't think it necessarily, furthers one goal or over another. All this is an extension of the status quo while we study the issue. So with that, I recommend you see if anyone in the public out there is hiding under a chair would like to speak.
Okay, does the commission have any questions for Richard? I have one. Will, assuming this is approved, will it sunset if the sign code is approved prior to the end of the 6-month period?
What we'll probably end up doing is, right now, the sign revisions don't address this in the sense that it isn't amending these sections. Probably if we want to do something different, we'll go ahead in that ordinance, add a section and say, this is, the extension ends earlier or whatever. So we may tweak it or extend it. So this is just giving us time to do that.
Okay.
But there will be another amendment processed in accordance with, Title 17, 1788 requires us to go through this process, make findings. Probably when it comes to feather banners, though, I think we're going to get that stuff out of Title 17. Just leave it in Chapter 9. Because again, it's not a building, it's not a structure, it's something, very rudimentary, doesn't require land use process.
Thank you, Richard. Any other questions? Richard? All right. Now is the time for public comment and testimony. No one is here to testify. There's no one in the audience, so no representatives of public agencies present who may want to comment. If there is no further comment, is there a motion to close the public hearing and the record?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. What is the pleasure of the commission?
Regards to what?
Huh?
I think it makes sense to just extend it. That's what the city council voted to do. They made a pretty quick decision on it last week. There wasn't anyone speaking either way at that public hearing either, so
Would you like to make a motion to forward a recommendation to the city council?
yeah, I would make a motion that we forward the recommendation to city council to
Is there a
extend.
second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. A final recommendation has been prepared for the commission's consideration at this meeting, right? Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, thank you. In anticipation of hopeful approval, I prepared a final recommendation. It's number 2019-09, and I wasn't aware that Josh would be here, so I had it as a 6-0 vote, and I just changed that to 5-0, so I'll have Richard print that. But if the commissioners would be able to make a motion to approve final recommendation 2019-09, and then Commissioner Griffiths, you can sign it after the meeting.
Right, okay. May we have someone make that motion?
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Thank you. The recommendation has been approved. The City Council will hold a public hearing on this matter on Monday, October 14th, 2019, at 6 p.m. here in Council Chambers. All right. Old business, work study. Lindsay, is that?
Yeah.
Ah,
So, Commissioners, you requested at our last meeting to bring back the design standards for an in-depth work study this evening in advance of the public hearing presentation that has been rescheduled for Tuesday, October 15th at 6 p.m. In your materials this evening, you received a attachment of the public hearing presentation that staff will present at the October 15th meeting. It is a detailed slideshow of all of the history, feedback from the comments and suggestions and the work that has been done over approximately 16 months now for the development of this design standards ordinance. We have, Anne Marie has summarized the changes based upon our current standards of 1774 and 1720 and compared those to the new proposed changes. And she is prepared to briefly present those for your consideration, and then we'd really like to just open it up for conversation on the draft ordinance and proposal, and prepare ourselves for a public hearing at our next regularly scheduled meeting.
Okay. This is a brief synopsis of the items that changed between, or that are proposed to change between the current ordinance and what is proposed. So I just started at the beginning of the current ordinance and went down the list. So
What page are you on, ma'am? Our packet page?
and thank you, Commissioner Nelson. It's not in the packet. I just did this afternoon.
Oh.
So it's a sheet that I have right here.
I can almost read that.
It's her personal note.
The purpose and intent, the current ordinance has 16 intent statements. The proposed ordinance has 5. The current ordinance has 8 undesirable elements of commercial development listed, and the proposed ordinance does not list any undesirable elements. Applicability. The current ordinance is applicable to all commercial and mixed-use development in the GC and RC zones for which site plan review is required. There are different standards for pearl development over string development. The proposed draft ordinance, and this is important, and I can say a little bit more about this, is applicable to all properties and uses in the GC and RC zones. The difference being that not all development requires site plan review. So under the current ordinance, the way Chapter 17.74 is written, if the project does not require site plan review, it does not have to comply with the design standards. The proposed ordinance is changing that so that compliance with the design standards is required regardless of needing site plan review. The proposed ordinance adds design standards in Chapter 17.74 that are applicable to the RM zone, which is the multiple family residential zone. Currently, there are no design standards for the RM zone, either in 1774 or in its own zoning chapter, which is 1720. So that's a pretty big difference. Another fairly significant difference is that the proposed draft adds a third differentiation. So the current design standards have standards for pearls and for the string, and the proposed draft ordinance adds another designation of high-use streets with some different standards for development along high-use streets. And then a map has been added to the proposed ordinance, which shows the pearls, the string, and the high-use streets. The current ordinance accepts out when design standards are not applicable, and that is when an existing use or development is proposed to be modified through redevelopment or exterior remodeling, and only where site plan review is required, the standards apply to that portion being modified. The proposed ordinance applies regardless of site plan review and in all situations except general maintenance activities. General maintenance activities include things such as repainting with existing colors or repairing a window. Replacing a window or a door is not considered a general maintenance activity in the proposed ordinance. Single-family dwellings, attached single-family dwellings, duplexes, and manufactured dwellings are exempt from the design standards. And the provisions for non-conforming remain the same. There have been no changes to the non-conforming. What that means, just by way of explanation, is that, and I'll give an example. if there's an existing site with an existing building and someone wants to do an addition to that building, under the current and the proposed, the addition would have to follow the design standards. The rest of the building would not have to be brought up completely to design standards. However, under the non-conforming portion of Title 17, 25% of the project value of the addition would have to go towards the site and the existing building to bring it more in conformance with with the design standards. So, for instance, that could be landscaping. They could work to bring the site up to the current landscaping code. It could be repainting to bring it up to the current, or what will be the color requirements. So I see nods, so yes, everyone gets it. Okay, I will move on. Administration, this is somewhat of a significant change, again, because currently it only applies when site plan review is required, and proposed requires it all the time. The proposal outlines specifically what falls under administrative review and what falls under quasi-judicial review, whereas in the current there isn't a clear differentiation between the two, and so that makes it easier for staff, basically, and for developers, so everyone has a very clear idea of which type of process is required when they do this. The guiding principles in site design, both have guiding principles and intent statements. The current one has more, and the proposed one has less, but they've combined them. So whereas the current has 12 guiding principles for pearls and 4 for strings, the proposed has 6 guiding principles for pearls and 4 for strings, but they've also established 3 for high-use streets. There were no changes to the building orientation requirements. There were no changes to the pedestrian spaces and common area requirements. A significant change is the addition of view protection. The current ordinance does not have any language at all about view protection, and the proposed ordinance adds a section on view protection as well as a diagram showing how that can be accomplished. Current ordinance does not have any specifications for parking area landscaping and parking landscape islands, and the proposed adds those specific dimension requirements, plant requirements, and the requirement for use of the Lincoln City's approved planting guide. The proposed ordinance adds specific language with an intent statement for each of the 3 pearls that do not have their own separate chapter, and those are Wacoma, DeLake, and Cutler City. And that's a significant change in the proposed ordinance. There are no changes to the minimum or maximum building height requirements, no changes to the number of required primary building entrances, no changes to the amount of transparency required, which is 60% in pearls and 40% in strings. And that same 40% is carrying over to high-use streets. The building form requirements largely stayed the same, but there were some specifics added. The current ordinance for building form just has like a general paragraph, and it doesn't really give any guidelines or specifications. The proposed ordinance adds a specific 10-foot step back requirement for multi-story buildings, and it adds specifications on the roof form for multi-story buildings, which helps developers in working through the process. It helps staff with less ambiguity, and it also helps will help improve the look of the city. We've also added to the building modulation requirement relation to shorter buildings, and made a requirement for providing 2 out of 5 features for buildings in the pearls. The roof form added specific primary roof form requirements in the pearls, specifying if you're having a pitched roof, it needs to be gabled or hipped with a minimum pitch of at least 612. Flat roofs, if you're proposing that, have to have projecting cornices. There are requirements for decks and balcony design in relation to building mass, and there's a prohibition for dual-pitched, hipped, mansard, A-frame roof forms, and none of those items are in the current code. There's no change to articulation. There's no change to the exterior lighting requirements. There's no change to the parking requirements, except for the addition of the landscaping. And there is an addition referencing the requirement for bicycle parking, and it references back to the existing section we have for bicycle parking already in the code. Those are the main items.
Thank you, good summary. Can we offer comments or
Yeah.
ask questions about?
I do want to note that there were 2 comments included in your packet this evening. One, a comment letter we received on September 3rd of 2019, and then one questions and comments we received from our chair, Patty Crone, who's not here this evening.
What pages are those?
Those comments start on packet page 179. Go ahead, Chair. Go ahead with your questions.
Oh, all right. I have a couple, and a suggestion on page, I guess my general question is, what clout do intent statements have? For example, in regards to the view, could a staff person say, your development conflicts with the intent statements? We're not issuing a permit. I mean, what clout do intent statements have?
The intent state, they do. The intent statements directly go to approval of adjustments and modifications.
To what?
Adjustments and modifications. So anything that says must or shall is required, and if they don't want to do that or cannot for whatever reason, they need to request an adjustment or a modification. And approval of that adjustment and modification is directly based upon the intent statements.
Right. For example, I have a question like, I suggested change in regard to one of the intent statements on packet page 100, and it's site design intent number 5. And it currently reads, maintain views to the ocean, bay, rivers, and forested hillsides and bluffs. And I was wondering if it would, I don't know why, I like specificity, whether it would be good to change that intent statement or to modify it to read, maintain views to the Pacific Ocean, Siletz Bay, Siletz River, forested hillsides, and coastal bluffs. So it makes it specific rather than general.
You can't see
But
the
it-
Siletz
it's
River
as inclusive. What?
You can't see the Siletz River from Lincoln City.
I'm sorry?
The Siletz
Yes,
River?
you can. You can see it from Taft, where it enters the ocean.
Oh, there, okay. Gotcha.
So add Pacific, Siletz, and Siletz.
Maintain views to the Pacific
Ocean,
Ocean, Siletz
Siletz
Bay,
Bay.
Siletz River, forested hillsides, and coastal bluffs.
And coastal bluffs, okay. Okay.
And then on packet page 106, I can't find my 106 right now. My computer is not behaving.
We all know that.
But there's a list there under A, I think, and I would recommend adding Siletz Bay and Siletz River to that list.
Yeah, it's right.
And then under
It is A.
B, the view protection guidelines, I think, should apply to 101 as well, particularly in Cutler City at the south entrance of the city.
Sorry, Trying to get detailed notes here.
So say that one more time, which you're,
Yeah, let me, view protection guidelines should apply to 101 as well, I think, because I think it's mentioned they don't apply to 101.
Right, it says except
oh,
for
so,
lots fronting.
so just strike that last, the view protection guidelines apply to all parcels with frontage along north-south streets?
Let me get to my page here.
It's one, yeah.
Oh, come on. I'm getting there.
That's okay, I cheated and I printed it. I know.
Almost there. So I can see what I'm talking about. Okay, let's see, 106.
Under,
Okay, A, we see scenic views of the Pacific Ocean. I was saying, add Siletz Bay and Siletz River to that list. And then under B, it says the view protection guidelines apply to all parcels with frontage along north-south streets, except for lots fronting Highway 101. But I think it should apply to them as well.
I think so too, and
Huh?
another thing I noticed was it says that a building should be no more than 200 feet in width, in designated pearls, and then 300 outside of it. But there's a lot of area along the ocean frontage that is not designated into a pearl. There's not very much that is. Actually, like, there's actually a chunk that's just oceanfront between D Lake and Ocean Lake. That's kind of isolated on the map, and I was thinking it would make sense to have that 200 feet if we're really wanting to protect the views on the whole ocean
Make it
front.
consistent.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
Pearls aren't designated based off of view protection, so
Right.
it doesn't make sense.
It's
to
history.
as to that, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had another couple of other minor ones, but I think I'll avoid them. But I think on page 126, and maybe this can be a part of our discussion on Monday, there's a section on sustainable design, and I was wondering, do we want to add incentives to encourage sustainable design? And if so, what kind of incentives might those be? And do we want to look at other cities like Corvallis or Albany that may provide incentives for sustainable design? Because the more that we encourage that, the better, I think.
Yeah, I think we should look into options of how to do that. Because I had a note on one about encouraging and rewarding something, but there were no specifics of like how we would go about
How about-
encouraging.
how-
That was
how
on-
about
I have
getting
page
that?
89 written here. I'm not sure which topic it was under.
And there's one minor thing where we talk about landscaping. We recommend that we use native plants, and for example, and you added the trees, which is great. And then we say, if you have an alternative, you need to get an arborist to say it's going to grow well here in Lincoln City. I was wondering, do we want to just get rid of that option? I think it occurs about 3 different times in the document, and just say, why bother with that? Just say it's got to be native to the Oregon coast, period.
What, I know from the few applications that have come in and inquiries that I've received since I've been here, which granted has not been long, everyone has used the planting guide.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine like being so specific. I mean, it might happen though that someone has a very specific plant that they want to plant for a
It's not in the
specific
planning
reason.
guide. Yeah.
And then but I mean, I would think, are there means for, if that situation occurs, for someone to apply for an exception?
They could
And
ask
then-
for an adjustment.
And then if they want it, we could say, well, if an arborist says it's okay.
Well, that's what it reads now.
Yeah.
So you're saying leave it in?
Well, no, well, I mean, you could, even if we take it out, someone would be able to ask for an exception, and we could still say no,
Up to
but yeah, it
you.
makes sense to me, because I would never go to that extent to have a plant. I would just get the guide and pick something that works.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I would say take it out.
All right.
And then one last thing I'll mention. When we talk about color design in the pearls, the first time we mention it and the second or third times we mention it, we say allow for brighter colors, subtle earth tones preferred, which seems like a contradiction. Later in the document, you explain what you mean by that. And I was wondering, maybe move that explanation up front, or so you don't, because to me, that's kind of jarring. You have allow for brighter colors, subtle earth tones preferred.
I made a note on that, actually, because that seemed
Contradictory.
entirely opposite.
Yeah.
What page is that on?
Packet page 60 is the first time it's mentioned.
Okay.
But then it's explained later on. Did you, and I can't remember, I didn't know what pages.
Yeah, later on, it's under Article 2, Commercial Zones, the guiding principles.
Okay.
It goes into the detail on the colors there, I think. But yeah, that was something else I was thinking about, was the colors, and that there seems to be an idea of allowing bright colors for, like, on accent is where it's written right now. And really, the colors that the city picked are kind of bright colors to represent Lincoln City.
Oh, orange and blue.
Yeah, and what I was thinking is, a lot of the notes I made were on the intent and the feedback that we received of this idea of unifying everything and a vision, and then we don't have a lot of specifics on how we're going to do that. Like with the string, it's visually distinguish the string from the pearls, and then unify the pearls from beginning to end, but we don't really have specifics on how we're going to do that. And I thought color, what if we picked one bright color or a few bright colors to allow in each pearl, and then if a few people choose to paint those colors, it'll kind of visually designate that area.
So you know when you're in Nelscott or Taft.
Right,
or-
because you start seeing that orange or that pink or the green or whatever color, and maybe let each pearl pick their color.
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
cool.
we could take feedback.
That's
I mean, I
cool.
think that'd be fun, because visually you'd start to see it pop up, and people could share paint, and it'd make it really, and color is cheap. I mean, just painting, and it's has so much of an impact on people, the way a color affects you, and subtle earth tones can tie everything together, but I think those pops of color are kind of what people expect on the coast. That's interest.
Bring those ideas to Monday's meeting. Yeah.
I was thinking about getting some, like, we should bring color, like, go by and grab
We'll
some, and
paint.
we'll kind of see which colors we like. But yeah, I noticed that there weren't very many specifics about that, because it's encouraged to have more of the subtle tones with pops of color. But I think, if we really want to see the vision happen, it has to be something people can understand and implement. And it, even
And
for
if
me,
they
it was just kind
they'll
of.
own it if they participate in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun. We'd have a lot of fun with color.
I like that. Ooh. Any other?
I have a question. One of the things, reading through this document several times, we've talked about Cutler City, and the reason I want to bring up Cutler City is because we have talked about it under emergency preparedness, with tsunami preparedness. We've talked about it under floodplains. We've had a lot of discussions, but when I started thinking about design standards, I was thinking about the fact that we are in an area there that's extremely low. We have those issues. We've talked about building some kind of an elevated platform. Why not, when we're talking about commercial, put forth an idea of building up an elevated buildings up that, where the parking would be below the building. It would also not consume as much space to have parking, for instance. But to have that elevated where it would serve multi-purposes, it would be putting the business up on a platform. It would potentially give the businesses a place to go to in the event of flood or tsunami or something in that area. And I was thinking design standards, everything comes down to doing it first right and not having to go back and change things. And I thought this might be a place where this might be addressed.
Okay. We could look at adding something in the portion where we talk about Wacoma, DeLake, and Cutler City.
Right.
Add some specifics right there about that.
I think practical idea, I think one conflict might be how would they interfere with the intent statements in terms of view, that kind of
Well,
thing.
if you look, when you're down in Cutler City, looking at like where Roby's is and I'm not sure, Builder Source, whatever they are now, name those those particular businesses. If you look around, you don't have a good view of the ocean, or the views are very
Depends on where you
limited.
are, yeah.
Right, it depends upon where you are. But if it's on the east side, building up isn't going to hurt as much as just looking at the lay of the land there. I mean, it's an alternative, but having done projects, the best time to make changes like that are at the beginning, not halfway through. And that's why I was thinking with design standards, this might be a place to talk about that. An elevated,
It could also save the future building owner a lot in their flood
Yep.
costs and flood
being the
insurance as well.
floodplains and everything and all the things they have to go through and concern about the elevation that they're at and everything, and that area is pretty low there. And this would be a way of getting things up, and again, it would serve a multi-purpose.
Monday. Be it
Monday?
Monday.
Bring it up again?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? I have one little typo on page 60, packet page 60.
In the PowerPoint?
Yeah, HIGHT should be high.
Materials and color. String or high-use streets? Where? I don't see it.
Oh, on page 50, page 55, packet
Oh,
page.
packet page 60?
55.
Oh, I was looking at the wrong one.
It's a heading, I think, in one of the
Oh,
charts.
yeah, you left an E out. That's
Oh,
G-I-G-H-T.
it's like
I
maybe
can't spell
Hyatt
height.
Ashbury.
Oh,
is
sorry,
where
I
they're
spell
going.
it.
54
height.
too.
Is it on 54 too?
Yep.
Have we addressed Patty's concerns that she wrote in her memo?
Both Anne Marie and I met with Patty before our last meeting and went through her comments and suggestions. We provided a lot of the background material for you guys. If you weren't, I know, Steve, you were part of the PAC meeting that stayed pretty attuned to this project throughout the process. The reason for the large packet last meeting really was in preparation for the public hearing for all of the public to have all of that history and background. I'm sure that Chair Crone may feel passionate about her comments, and hopefully we'll bring them up in our work study or at the public hearing on the 15th if it hasn't been something that gets addressed through other public comments or other means. I do want to give the commission the opportunity to discuss her comments, as she's not here this evening, which was why we did include them in the materials for you tonight. So if any of those jump out for you that you would like to comment on or make recommendations or suggestions to, we're happy to listen.
Does anybody have you had a chance to look at the memo?
I will state one of her questions was why 4 flat dwellings and tiny house developments were not listed. The ordinance that passed 4 flat dwellings and tiny homes was adopted prior to the consultant getting our draft language to make edits to. So those have been corrected within the city's attorney's draft.
Well, I have some comments. One of the comments that I have, this thing, I don't know where it's to me. We're increasing the size of multi-story or multifamily buildings significantly, and I was wondering, considering that light and air is one of the things that we like, that seems very imposing to fill up 65% of a lot with a multifamily dwelling that could be 3, maybe even 4 feet high, depending how they build it. That's a pretty imposing building.
Isn't the height restriction still?
I think she's referring to lot coverage. if
Lot
I'm
coverage,
correct.
yes, I am, 65%.
Going from 40 to 60,
65%, yeah, and that's a pretty big building.
or 45% to 60%, I think.
Correct.
The coverage. And I'm wondering why we would want to have that big of a building. Because if you cover up a lot, 65% of a lot with a 3-story building, you're going to have a seriously imposing building.
We do still have the standards within here to provide the public as well as common open space. So I'm not sure that any development, multiple buildings or singular buildings would ever be able to meet that 65% lot coverage with the need for accessibility, parking, and common open area. However, it was something to maximize and be able to, it's coordinated with the change in density for the multifamily dwellings and apartments. We significantly changed the way that density is calculated in the multifamily zone. We previously had this long algebraic calculation that you had to measure distance between your closest commercial use to determine the density for that area, and then a different part of the lot might have different density. So we did change density to a minimum density of 25 dwelling units per net acre. And so at changing that density, we felt that the lot coverage would need to be adjusted if we were to ever to be able to meet that density proposed.
Okay, and that brings up another question. Why are we proposing a specific density?
We are not proposing a specific, we're proposing a minimum. So,
Well, okay.
So it's not a maximum, so it's
No.
not a cap, but allowing, as we're seeing that family demographics are significantly changing. We're no longer having families with 4 or 5 children needing large places to live. We have a lot of younger and more singular residents that need smaller tenant spaces. Density has become professionally in the planning realm a little antiquated, because if you have 25 studios versus 25 4-bedroom apartments, that is a huge different impact on the context and community fabric. So instead of requiring a maximum density to a particular housing type, this provides a little more flexibility for the future developments to be able to provide a wide variety of whether it's studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, or 3 or 4 bedroom rentals if ever
But
pencil.
if I had 1 or 2 lots that were in the normal lots that were in the system, and I wanted to build like 18 apartments, I couldn't, right?
Well, it's based upon your net acre. So there are
Which is
footnotes
40,000,
starting on
48,000 square feet? How many square feet are in an acre?
43.
no net
40
net acre.
Net is-
You got to read the footnotes on page 77. Gross area is the total horizontal area within the lot lines of a unit of land. So that if you had 1 acre, that'd be 43,560 square feet.
Yeah.
Net area is determined by subtracting the following from the gross: areas with slopes exceeding 25%, significant wetlands, areas dedicated for public rights-of-way, areas proposed for private streets, areas in the flood zone, areas dedicated to the public for park purposes. So we also provided an example in footnote 4, still on packet page 77. Example of 5,000 gross square, say you have 5,000 gross square feet, you subtract 1,200 square feet for significant wetlands and right-of-way dedication. That would equal a 3,800 net square foot. 3,800 divided by the 4,560, which is 1 acre, equals 9/10 of an acre. Multiply that by 25, you would have 2.25, and we round down per our standards in the code. So you'd have a minimum density of 2 dwelling units for that lot.
So I could build a multifamily unit with only 2 dwelling units?
Well, the definition of multifamily is Three or more, you're
Oh, that's what
correct
I
there, Lenny.
figured.
But in the residential multifamily zone, we do allow duplexes, triplexes, and other
Yeah.
housing units.
But are we, when we talk then about residential, RM, we're talking about also duplexes and triplexes, et cetera?
Yeah, so the use is attached single-family, which would be a townhome, duplexes, and then anything over a duplex. So a triplex or higher is considered multifamily.
Okay. When I look at packet page 67, I find that the most unlikely residential multifamily I could imagine.
What's your point?
My point is, I've never seen a residential multifamily that looked anything like that.
For the building form,
Yeah, for the building form. With all those dormers and all those separate doors and things. That's very unusual.
and I think that the apartment complexes that have been built in Lincoln City over the last 5 years is a significant reason for this amendment and this overhaul with our design standards.
But I've lived all over the United States one time or another.
It does.
And I've never seen a building that looked like, at all like that. But is that just an example?
That is just an example of building
If you
form.
were going to build a multifamily, would you have to have all those dormer and insets and things?
No, you would just have
Okay.
to meet the design standards that I referenced when I was giving the comparisons to what's existing and what's proposed. So the design standards for multifamily are not in this chapter in 1720, they're in 1774, so you have to flip to 1774. And it requires certain features on the apartment buildings, but it certainly doesn't have to look like
Okay.
that.
And then I have one last comment at the moment. This is a new structure, and I'm of two minds about this structure.
Which one?
Well, the whole thing, the whole redesign of this whole section is because what it does is that in every section, it references 2 or 3 other sections. To find out about this part, you have to go here. To find out about that part, you have to go there. There's a good thing to be said about that, which is you only have to change the underlying structure once. So, and then it references all the others. And that is always a problem with zoning codes, is you forget the one over there that you haven't seen in 2 weeks, or 2 months, or 2 years. The downside of it is to figure out what you can do, you gotta do a lot of flipping around. Does anybody else see that problem?
I'm not a developer, so.
Well, no,
You're
I'm
right.
certainly not a developer, but I've tried to interpret this code for people who want it to do something, and that one is a little tricky.
Commissioner Nelson,
Yes, ma'am.
a few thoughts for you on that.
Okay.
So because about half my experience in planning has been on the private sector, and that is what I did for developers as a planner for developers. I took their project, wherever it was, looked at the code for the jurisdiction, and figured out how to make it work. And every jurisdiction does their codes like this. So professional people, developers, they're very used to flipping between sections. It's pretty standard.
It also keeps the code a little thinner and
Yes.
more
Yeah,
digestible.
I understand that you're not doing a lot of repetitive language,
Right,
but I can see that it's a maze.
it
And
is.
how well-trained our mice are, I don't know. Okay, that's all I have at the moment.
I have one question on packet page 39, where we talk about the existing code comparing to the public draft code. And so, single-family and timeshare units have been removed, right, from multifamily?
Correct.
Great, good.
Was
Thank
that,
you.
that was it? Okay. In the proposed ordinance, we have removed the allowance of single-family housing in the RM zone to incentivize more development and increase our housing capacity. Timeshare units are a commercial use, and so those are limited to our recreation commercial, as well as, I believe, our general commercial zones. And as are our public and private golf courses.
Yes.
I had a question. So you mentioned when you were going over the differences, you specifically mentioned windows, and that was something I made a note on. So what is the difference? How do you necessarily repair as opposed to replace a window? And I understand if it's like a functional thing that might be able to be fixed, but say hypothetically you're renting and either by something caused by the weather or a passerby or a car accident or something, one of your front windows gets broken. As far as the proposed code, you would have to bring, or like 25% of the project, you would have to put, so that would, I mean, if a window's $1,000, you'd have to spend $250 improving the building somehow. Is there anything to designate that the owner would have to do that, or is a broken window, to me, that seems like general maintenance because windows break?
Well, my take on that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lindsay, is that the intent of replacement is if you're changing the size.
Correct.
Okay,
So if,
actually reframing for,
right, if the frame is still usable and you just need to get the window guy out there
Okay.
to put a new
That would be
pane in,
general maintenance.
that would be general maintenance and
that makes
repair.
sense. Okay, that's
Yeah.
what I was kind of wondering, is what is repairing versus replacing?
If you're changing the
Repairing
dimension.
the glass. Okay, that makes sense. So if you're actually wanting to add a window, you can't just add one, you'd have to actually meet that 60% standard if you're in a Pearl.
Right.
Okay, that makes
And
sense.
I will double check with my building official and look through the building code to make sure that I have given you the correct information and get back to you at the work study on October 7th on that.
Okay. And then I had one other question. Looking at the map and with the three different differentiations of the Pearl, the String, and the high-use streets, I noted, I think it's about 4 different areas in town. Let's see. So both the northeast and northwest blocks from 21st to 22nd Street. I wrote Northwest 39th Street. I couldn't quite read it, but I think that's right where it is on the map. Southeast 12th Street. That all of those areas, there's like a city block. If you're not looking at streets, but if you look at the block that the buildings are actually on, some blocks looks like they'd be subjected to all 3 designations, or that it could be quite confusing which one they might fall under. Or you're going to have businesses right next to each other, or even residential buildings next to each other that have different standards.
Oh, because.
I didn't know if we'd thought about that, where they overlap, and then also that, like Ocean Lake and D Lake, the Pearls touch. So, we talked about designating, the differences. Would we have a sign there, and there's a string between Nelscott and Taft, or, there's the other idea that the Pearls, you could get rid of the idea of the string and just have the Pearls expanded, because I don't think of driving through Nelscott to Taft. I think I could draw a line where I think it changes, going over the hill, I think, right by in at Spanish Head,
That's
so.
Interesting observation.
Just ways to
yeah.
simplify it based off of how we practically.
Commissioner Baker, would you mind marking up a map for me after the meeting
Yeah,
for
yeah.
those specific areas?
Yeah, no
Look into that
We could
further.
address that on Monday then, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought we just might think about, is where they overlap and where these usages touch, and if, I didn't even think about what kind of
applies
differences.
if it overlaps.
Right.
Yeah,
which
how
has
differences
precedence,
might
yeah,
apply, but
Yeah. Good point, Lou. Anything else?
that was all I had.
So, great, this is a good introduction to our Monday meeting, and thank you for the summary comparing the new with the old, because that really
Yeah, that
was
was
very
very,
helpful. Yeah,
very
yeah.
useful.
I'd like to ask if we could get a copy of your comparisons. Could you email that to us?
I can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to say no, just as a
As
joke,
long as you don't critique typing as it was done.
No, we won't.
It's
Or
not
any spelling,
formatted.
Patty.
You can spell height any way you'd like.
but- Okay.
Thank you. All right, is there any new business this evening?
There is no new business this evening.
Okay, is there any planning commission training?
There is no planning commission training this evening. However, I do want to note that Commissioner Baker, as well as Commissioner Brainerd, sorry, Josh, both attended the Planning Commission training with me in Bend last week on the 25th of September. We had a great presentation by John Morgan, who is a Oregon consultant that does a lot of training and informative information for planning commissioners and city councils. Really supportive and helpful for those small cities, a lot smaller than ours, I think. But it was a really insightful training. It was good information that we got. Some highlights, he talked about what is the role of the planning commission, and that's to make decisions, and the decisions need to be good, defensible, and credible. And that you guys as a commission are the ambassadors and kind of the welcome mat, or the mud mat, depending, for local democracy. And that you really are our lifeline to the citizens. And so with that, I hope that our public hearings, as you as commissioners have the opportunity and you think about our public hearings, maybe treat them like it'd be a dinner party at your house, and hopefully some people can show up and get involved. To really like to see a little more involvement. Personally, my own professional goal, I would love to see more of Lincoln City attending these public hearings and participating. I know we have strong viewership online and on Channel 4. However, getting written comments in, telling us we're doing good, telling us we're doing terrible, that it's good. We're here to do the work for the people. So I just want to thank you for your time, and then as you talk with friends and family, neighbors, or not friends or not family, and enemies, just please bring them in. I can give you all a stack of my cards and say, call Lindsay. And I asked Marcy to do that when she first started, and I had a very colorful phone call, and ended up being a coffee meeting that I had with a local business owner. It was really informative for me, and I think for him as well. So I just ask that more of that occur as we really try to dive into some of these significant changes, specifically these design standards. We will be seeing the impact of this ordinance, if it isn't ripped apart in a few years, down generations. You know, it really takes 20 or 30 years for some of these improvements to really be seen as redevelopment occurs. One thing I was looking at today was our monthly report, and I was looking at how much repairs or remodels have been invested in our commercial properties within the city to date. We had over $13 million of investment in Lincoln City to our commercial properties. I'm not sure what the total number of new retail that entails, because for the month of September there was no new retail square footage, but it would be interesting. We're seeing people spending money on their existing structures, and we'd like to be able to see that continue so we can continue to grow and flourish economically, and be more self-surviving or thriving.
Now, Lincoln City is definitely looking better and better in the years that I've lived here. Yeah.
Great. Moving on to reports and comments on the agenda. Thank you for bringing that up, Chair Griffiths. We do have a joint City Council Planning Commission meeting that has been scheduled in this room, I believe. I will have to confirm.
1 o'clock on Monday, right?
1 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Monday. The topics on that agenda include the ordinance you just passed at the last meeting regarding North Lincoln City, the comprehensive plan amendments, as well as the design standards we discussed this evening, and the upcoming sign code update, the large comprehensive one, not the small extension that we did tonight.
Did the City Council vote to approve the North Lincoln City?
That will be going in front of the City Council at their next regularly scheduled meeting on October 14th. So this will be an opportunity to talk about the Commission's intent and reasoning behind your recommendation and some of the changes you made as you move forward, and as this City Council considers it for their next public hearing and first reading.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any comments? City Attorney? No? Yes,
I
Miles.
have a question.
Question?
Last when we voted, three of us lost the vote on the measure, and I'm wondering if the city council has taken that up yet regarding surf tides.
That also will be heard by City Council on October 14th.
We do not tend to present city council with any recommendations from the planning commission until we have the signed final recommendation, which was on tonight's agenda.
Then my question is, should or can a member of the planning commission speak to the council directly, or is that improper?
I would leave this to our legal
Mr.
counsel,
Appicello.
Mr. Appicello.
I think you speak as a group, and you've already done that. So you speak as a group, you've already done that. So you can always go and testify at public hearings, but please do so as yourself, not as a planning commissioner.
Yeah, and don't identify yourself as a planning commissioner when you do it.
In fact, I think that in the rules it says specifically that you can testify as yourself, but you have to specifically state that your opinion is your opinion and not that of any city body or anything like that. But
Yes.
you absolutely can speak in a public testimony.
And don't wear a hat that says planning commissioner.
Don't wear a hat that says loser vote, planning commission.
All right, I think that's it. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.